All right, we're back. I've been doing a lot of work to this and not really documenting it simply because I had a goal and a timeline that I wanted to hit, and filming videos was not super conducive to that. And I didn't want to hamper my progress for the sake of making videos, just because it's pretty generic stuff, and if you want to figure out how to do it, you can figure out how to do it. So didn't really do anything crazy. Well, I guess that can be subjective. I'm not going to show the car as it is right now because it looks very different from the last time you saw it, and I would like to properly take a video of it, get good pictures and such like that, and right now it's not a good time for that. So rather than that, I'm going to show you probably one of the more painful things I've had to do to the car in terms of what I had previously done to it. And basically the GM drivetrain is now complete because the Ford independent rear suspension is no longer in it. And I'll go into why it's not there anymore and what failed, and basically if I had to do it again, what I would do different. All right, so under the car now is a GM 7.5-inch rear axle. And I'm sure a lot of you will say, why'd you use that one? It's not even a strong one. The Ford 8.8 is much stronger. Why didn't you do that? It's because this particular axle was free. So free 99 is much better than stronger, especially when it's in a lighter car, and I probably don't even need that strong of a differential in the first place. This is actually the rear end out of my brother's old drag car that he just had sitting in the corner of his shop, and he said, hey, you can have it if you're going to use it. I didn't want to throw it away because it's still good. So that's what we did. So how we ended up doing it was the factory lower mounts on the axle stage. So these are the factory ones from GM. This came out of an 85 Monte Carlo SS. So that mount is factory, and this mount is factory. And all of the body side mounts are factory in the Corolla. So all of those, from both the lower mounts, which is way forward here, and the upper mounts, which is up in here, those are the factory Corolla mounts. All we had to do is drill them out to a 5/8 bolt because that's what the Heim joints are. They're all 5/8 joints. Or they're actually 3/4 joints with 5/8 high misalignment spacers in them, and that spacer actually took up a lot of the space in the factory mounts to where we didn't have to stack a whole bunch of washers. Now, if you look at it, these arms are slightly angled, so it's kind of a triangulated 4-link, but not nearly enough. So that's why we had to have this panhard bar from here all the way across. And in these, they came factory with a panhard bar, but I ended up cutting out the body mount because I was going to an independent rear suspension and I didn't think that I needed it. So hindsight's a little bit better on that one, but it's in here now. I was able to retain my brake calipers, but I was actually able to get better brake rotors that fit the car better. These are all circle track parts, including circle track wheels. And these are 15 by 10 with a 1-inch backspace. So you have a 9-inch lip from the mounting face to the outside of the tire. And that's all driven by the wide body that I built. That was built to match the factory SUV spacing of the Ford 8.8 IRS. So the body got built to it, which is what drove the front suspension width. So I wasn't going to change the rear tire width. So that's why we have a very nice lip on our rear tires. Okay, so these are my new rear tires. They have a different lugs pattern than the front. These are 5x1 14.3 or 5x4.5. These are 5x4 3/4 because that's factory old time GM stuff. So this goes all the way back about full hand width to where this actually starts, all the way deep. So it's a very wide tire to the point where the brakes are actually inboard of the inner lip of the tire. So I will never ever have to worry about rear brake temperatures because they are getting fresh air all the time. All of these little brackets are just standard weld-on brackets that we got from Summit or Jags or Speedway or one of the many various brands that you can buy parts from. So we got a weld-on brake caliper mount for there, coilover mounts, and I believe these are all-star kind of universal weld-on upper mounts. So between that, we have a weld-on panhard bar mount, and the axle, it really wasn't that difficult to do. So in the grand scheme of things, I would highly recommend. Now the next question is, because I'm sure someone's going to ask, could you put this in a AE86 or a TE72 that you don't have super wide tires for and you don't want it to be super wide? The answer is probably. Where the axles end up in relation to the car body is very close to what I would assume the factory would be. I don't have the factory mounting face to mounting face width because this car never had a rear axle in it. When I got it, it had no suspension, it had no nothing. So everything had to be built. If you want to try it or look up the spacing, I'm sure there's options for it. I know from the factory these things basically had glass axles and glass differentials to where they've just killed themselves. So if that's what you're interested in about and you're kind of wondering about, look up the axle widths from basically hub mounting face to hub mounting face. You can reuse the lower mounts, you'll just have to weld on upper mounts and get the geometry right. We basically have it to where as the pinion comes up and down, the angle doesn't change, or if it changes, it's very, very minute within a couple degrees to where we want it to be. And the drive shaft was actually able to be retained by swapping out some U-joints, so it made it pretty simple. If you were looking at an axle replacement for your old Corolla, this might be one of them, and they're not very sought after in terms of old muscle cars because they're not strong enough to do the work that they want them to do, which is drag cars, hard launches, taking abuse, and most of these old American cars are full frame cars. They're very heavy, so they tend to break. But for this application, I think it's great. Everything kind of fell together. It seemed like it was almost meant for it. So if you're interested in that, I would look into it. Elephant in the room is, why did the 8.8 actually fail? What went wrong to where I had to literally undo all the work that I did, which was a lot, and start from scratch and try again? It basically came down to the fact that the factory knuckles used a trailing arm setup that I could not replicate without having the arms and the body side mounts to match. That made a situation where the mounting points that I had were not sufficient enough to triangulate and hold the knuckle in space where it needed to be. As a result, when I drove the car forward for the first few times, it actually bent the whole rear subframe, and the wheels ended up going about 3 to 4 inches forward from where I had initially set them. So there was enough torque coming out through the tires that I didn't have enough triangulation all the way back to the inner mounts of the rear suspension on the subframe to restrain the knuckle. So it was literally bending everything that I built, and I went and realigned it and tried it again, and it just bent it more. So at that point, it was either going to be redo everything from scratch and hope that I got it right, or put a solid axle back in this, because there's a lot of information about solid axles and how to restrain them, and they're a lot less complicated than independents. If I were to ever try and do an independent rear suspension again, I would swap the entire cross member. Now this includes the diff, the knuckles, the axles, the arms, everything, because in that case you don't have a trailing arm that you need to have a body side mount for. Everything is retained on the rear cross member, and that is the way to go. I believe this is common with Miatas. They'll take the whole rear Miata suspension and basically put it into something else. It is also common with Mustang Cobras, which also have an 8.8, which hindsight's 2020. I could have gone with that, but those were about 5 times the price, so I didn't want to do that, and I said, let's challenge myself, we'll try it. I tried it, it didn't work. So yeah, it's me admitting that I'm not perfect, and we learn and we move on. So if you're interested in doing an 8.8 swap, get one that has the cross member, or reuse your factory arms and reuse your factory knuckles and get adapter axles. So that's it. The car it's running, it's driving, it's painted, there's lots of carbon bits. It looks very different from the last time you saw it, and that's kind of the point. But a lot of work has been done, and someday soon, hopefully I'll have a video out basically driving the car. It might not be till next spring. It's about to get really cold here, and it's probably gonna snow soon. So that's just the general update. I might be doing some carbon stuff over the winter, we'll see. But until then, that's the update on the Corolla. It's alive and it drives, so that's about as good as I could hope to be at this point.